Hello, Saddleback Church, and everyone else joining us. My name is Pastor Anthony. I'm hosting Kay Warren today. And together, we're going to continue this conversation that Pastor Rick started with Kay and best-selling author and Bible teacher Beth Moore this weekend. We're about to talk about the hope and healing for people that has experienced sexual abuse and assault. And we're very excited to continue this conversation. But we're going to let a few of you get logged on and get situated there. I know that this is live, so we're going to spend some time up top just waiting for you guys to log on and see where you guys are coming from. If you leave a comment, let us know where you're coming from. A lot of people are logging in from all over the world. But this past weekend, we started this very important dialogue. This conversation, I think, is incredibly timely for our nation. And if you missed the message, you can actually watch it at saddleback.com. And we'll throw a link up for you in the comments, but watch it later because you're not going to want to miss this conversation. This is going to be an amazing conversation. So what we're going to do, let me just kind of tell you the goal for this. The goal is just to continue the conversation. Our hope is that we can start more conversations throughout this nation and really help people break free from this bondage of this terrible sin that's happened against people. That's what we're going to do. So we're going to spend the next 20 minutes just asking questions and going. In fact, if there's time at the end, we will answer some of your questions. So as we begin this conversation, if you have a question, just leave it in the comments. And if we have time at the end, we will answer them. Oh, hey, Thomas from Hong Kong. Wow, nice. And Kim from Kentucky. Just want to say hello to you guys. Thanks for logging in. You're going to love this conversation. So if you missed the message, you can watch it at saddleback.com, but watch it later because this weekend we began a very, very important conversation that I'm just proud to be a part of this conversation. So with me today, I have Kay Warren. This is author, Bible teacher, co-founder of Saddleback Church, and my dear friend, Kay. Say hi to everybody, Kay.
Hey there. So glad you guys could join us.
So, Kay, before we dive in, I know this was a big weekend for our church. And historically, Saddleback has really made these courageous moves going into these really difficult and tough conversations. In fact, sometimes we're the very first one into these tough conversations. We've seen it with mental health and HIV and AIDS and addictions and our Celebrate Recovery ministry. In fact, recently, Rick has really leaned into the conversation of racism and bigotry, and now this sexual abuse. And I must say, I've been a part of this staff now as a pastor for 6 years, and I've had many, many proud moments. But this weekend was an especially proud moment. It was really cool to see us tackle such a very difficult conversation. We see this conversation, this moving in our nation right now with the Me Too movement and the Time's Up and We Too movement. But finally, a church from our platform is proclaiming the name of Jesus and shining light in this very dark conversation. And I just want to say I was very proud to be a part of that this weekend. I know you were too. So give us a little background before we dive in. Give us a little background. What's the story behind this? Why this conversation and why now?
Yeah, I wish that we were talking about this, and I told you I wish I had like some incredible story that is the backstory, but it really just came down to a sense of this is the moment. This is in the cultural moment and moment in time to address it. Our obviously here in the United States, there's been a hue and cry in the last 4 to 6 months about sexual abuse and assault and seeing the toppling of very powerful men from their places of ownership of companies or visibility in companies, and it's been shocking, just absolutely shocking. I mean, I've been talking about my own story of abuse for about 25 years, so it's not a new topic for me. Right. But to see it culturally, see it in every level of government and entertainment, and it slowly has trickled its way toward the church. And it was the moment, Rick just, he just knew that. He knew that this was the moment. The church couldn't be silent. The church, while everyone else was talking about it, everyone else was exposing those who had done evil, those who had perpetrated evil. This was not the moment for the church to be silent, but definitely a moment for the church to speak up and not be silent, and actually even go beyond silence to exposing those who have done wrong. So a couple weeks ago, he asked Beth Moore, because she's also been really public with her story of personal story of sexual abuse. And she was available, which was shocking because Beth just doesn't go speak at local church, and she just doesn't do that. Her schedule is so full. But she agreed to come, and who knew that one of the largest sex abuse trials in our nation would also coincide, and that just days before we spoke on the weekend, that perpetrator, Larry Nassar, was going to be sentenced, and all these hundreds of women were going to step forward with their stories. We didn't know that. We couldn't have predicted that. God knew that. So while Rick was just responding kind of to the cultural moment and the own feeling of the Spirit of God, here was this national story that was going to come cascading in on it that just amplified the need and why we need to talk about it.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Just to recap for those of you just logging in, hey, Sandra, all the way from Downey. Hey, Wendy. For those of you logging in, I'm here with Kay. And Kay and Rick and Beth Moore just began a very important conversation of hope and healing for those who have experienced a traumatic experience of sexual abuse and assault. And we just want to continue that conversation, just further dialogue that conversation. So if you have questions, if we have an opportunity to answer your questions at the end of this conversation with Kay, leave your questions in the comments and we'll get to some of those questions. So please leave those questions. But I have a question for you, Kay. In your message this past weekend, you listed a 6-step process that healing process. And in that process, your first step, you said, is to establish a safe place. That was the first step of the 6-step process of finding healing for sexual abuse and assault. And what you meant by that is find a person that feels safe, that you can share what happened to you. So here's my question. Why is that so important? Why is revealing the secret of that pain such an important part of the healing process?
Yeah, good question, Anthony. And that's a 2-part thing, because it's not just the importance of revealing it, but it's to whom you reveal it. I think so many people who've experienced sexual abuse or harassment or assault are not believed. That's one of the tragedies that's kind of cooked into this sinful thing that's done to us, is that when a person who's been abused finds the courage to say it to maybe a parent, if it was happening in the home, or to a teacher, or to even law enforcement, sometimes they're not believed. And when they're not believed, or it's discounted, or somebody says either that didn't happen, or you misunderstood what was happening, or they say, okay, it happened, but we're not ever going to talk about it again, or there's no way we're going to tell anybody that this has happened. When that's the response, it's a way of re-victimizing the person. It's a way of extending the abuse. And so those of us who've been abused, we learn pretty quickly that there's actually danger in telling our story, all the way from just not being believed to actively our stories being suppressed. And as one of the gals who testified at Larry Nassar's trial, the gal that's received so much press, Rachel Den Hollander, she lost her church when she said, I've been abused, and I don't appreciate the way that you're dealing with another case of abuse within our own church. They actually told her and her husband that they really shouldn't stay in that church anymore. Wow. So the stakes are high when we start to tell our stories. So if you actually decide to say something, to find someone that you believe is going to be safe and trusted is crucial. It's critical. You can't tell the story. Let's just say you're a child that's maybe you were abused as a child, and maybe it happened in your home. And if you tried to tell, your mom or your dad or, your grandma or you tried to tell a family member, and they were actually the person who was perpetrating the abuse, if you tried to, it's not going to work. You've got to have some place that is going to believe you. And that's why it's the first step, because there's so much risk in telling the story. So to have safety, or at least what you think is going to be safety, is critical to actually beginning the process of healing.
I love what you said, the idea of what happened to you. And there was a moment that was beautiful, that you said, it's not your fault.
Yes.
It's not your fault. I kept on saying that. It's almost like you took the power away from the perpetrator, and you spoke truth into the person that has been probably believing it's been their fault all these years. That was just a beautiful, beautiful moment this weekend. One of my favorite moments.
Can I just follow on that for a second?
Yeah, go.
Okay. Because I think that is, if I look back on the weekend and what was one of my favorite moments, or one of the moments where I just felt the Spirit of God almost, like just landing on everybody in that room, that was one of them. Because I think that the lie that the enemy would have us believe is that somehow it is our fault. Either we, particularly if you're a child and you don't have the cognitive ability to form words and thoughts around what's happened to you, and maybe you don't feel like you're in a safe place, or there's no one safe to tell. And so when you are abused or assaulted, the enemy steps into that vulnerable place and says, this wouldn't have happened if you weren't like you are. It's either if you weren't as attractive, or you weren't as cute as you were as a kid, or if you weren't as bubbly and bright with your personality, or if you hadn't crawled onto grandpa's lap, then he would have never done what he did. Or if you hadn't, then moms sometimes end up blaming their daughters when they've been abused by the dad or a brother. And the words are, it's, your fault. You shouldn't. It's the way you're dressing. I mean, there's so many ways for the enemy to heap blame on the person who's been abused. And you start to believe that lie, and you start to operate out of that lie, because of course there's going to be the guilt. The guilt isn't real. The shame, as Beth said, is not the abused. It belongs to the abuser. But when that abuse has happened as a child, and then I start to think about, maybe women who are assaulted. They're not children. Maybe there's some workplace harassment or something. And then when you try to tell your story and somebody says again, well, if you didn't do this, and I saw, sadly, I think it was this morning, maybe it was yesterday, I saw a church in another state that had put something on their outside billboard that basically said, stop sexual abuse, put on more clothes. And you didn't hear about that? Yeah.
No, I did not.
Yeah. And I don't want to name a state because it's not that state's fault.
Yeah,
but even as currently as yesterday, there was a church giving the message to the world and to those who have been abused or assaulted, it's your fault. So to be able to say very definitively, very strongly, that's why I kept repeating it, because the message has been hammered in so deeply of it's your fault. So the message of it's not your fault also has to be hammered in so deeply. It is not your fault. That in itself can begin to set us free in ways that almost nothing else can. Just to know, as Beth said, the shame belongs to the abuser, not to the abused.
No, that was absolutely a powerful moment. Another one of my favorite moments was when Pastor Rick came to Popular, and he changed the conversation.
Sheriff Rick.
he got scary up there.
I'm gonna beat you.
Yeah, he said, this is. I want to be clear. Well, no, I'm gonna go on that because as a man, I resonated with that. Like I was ready to go to war with them, and I know all the men in the building was ready to go there with them. He said, it was so powerful. He said, I want to. This is a safe church for the sheep, but this is not a safe church for the wolves.
Right.
I want to be clear about that. And he says, if you are here preying on the women of this church, I'm going to find you. I'm going to track you down. I'm going to prosecute you to the fullest extent. And I guarantee you all the men of this church is going to be here with me. And there was a moment where we all just kind of riled up and we're like, we puffed our chest. We were like, yeah. And I remember after the service, I was talking to Beth Moore about this, and she was having a blast with this too. And she's like, I don't think I've ever heard a pastor speak like that before from stage. And I said, but what was cool about it is all the men rallied around it, and the women felt protected and safe. Yep. And she said, that's exactly the way it's supposed to be. And that stuck with me. It resonated because the man has a role. And I'm not, I don't want to minimize the fact that there are men being abused too. There's boys and men being abused too. So I don't want to minimize that.
And I want to talk about that for a minute when you finish what you're saying.
Yeah. And we'll go right into that. So I don't want to minimize that because there's real pain there for men. But if you look at the stats, it definitely flows more on the women's side, and there's a place for the man in this fight. And so one of my questions, and you can dive into this, one of my questions is, what is our place? As a man, as a father, as a husband, where can I join in in this conversation, and not only to prevent sexual abuse, but also be that help, be that hope for those that have been affected by sexual abuse.
Yeah, and that's a critical, actually, what the role of men in preventing abuse for women and girls and boys is critical, because we have a different frame of reference than the world. The world is rallying around, and men are getting involved, and people wearing pins and different things that showing their support, which is so important. And men are speaking out on behalf of women, particularly in the entertainment industry. You see that. But the church even has a different, we have that, but we also have an even greater responsibility, because as John Perkins said, we have one blood. We belong to each other. We are part of the body of Christ. So we have even a higher stake in becoming allies, not adversaries. And so if I, had to say anything, I would say it's for men to see themselves as allies, as not adversaries, and to be protective in the way that's not patronizing, not, oh, the poor little woman, not that kind of protective, not in the sense that maybe in the past that we used it, which meant that, oh, women are so fragile and frail that, man, they can't vote, and they can't, they've got to be kept in the house in the shade, and, all that kind of, not that kind of protectiveness, but the protectiveness that says, I share your pain, and I'm not going to let this happen to you. And if it does happen to you, I'm going to share your pain. It's I feel it too. And when men and women look at each other that way, through that lens of, I'm going to share what's happened to you, because we're part of the same body of Christ. That's happened to me. And so therefore I am going to respond and care for you as if it were me. Care for you as if this is my sister, my mom, my daughter. And when we look out for each other that way, I think that it's so helpful. And then to be aware of the subtle and not so subtle ways that men can minimize women, but to look at a way actually to do the reverse of that, which is actually to elevate them, to elevate them in honor. The Bible says we're supposed to outdo each other in showing honor. And so there's a mutuality. It's not here's the men and here's the women, but there's the mutuality of we belong to each other in the body of Christ. And I think when you look at each other through that lens, then women do feel the protection. It's like, hey, I know the men in my church have my back, not only for me, but for my children. And the men in the church go, you know what? The women in this church, they've got my back. They care about me. They see me as a brother. My pain is their pain. And I think when that becomes more the way we operate, abuse doesn't have as much of an opportunity to grow and fester in that kind of a culture.
No, that's good. Something you said sparked something in me, because I had a conversation with my wife after this weekend, and it obviously stirred up some conversation in our household. And she fortunately has never experienced sexual abuse. But she was telling me a story about her feeling objectified. Her group of friends growing up were supposed to be her friends. And it was like a group of guys, and it was almost like she was a prize to be won, a trophy to be had, and who can get to her first. Yeah. And she felt like a piece of meat. So to me, I want to talk to the men real quick that's watching, man to man. We got to stop this. We got to stop objectifying our women. I just want to, just real quick, we have to stop looking at our women as a piece of meat, a trophy to win. They're not sexual beings. They're whole beings. They're daughters of a king. They were made by God, for God, in his image, with a purpose. And I love what you said, the mutuality. Women and men were designed differently, and they both have a purpose, and their purpose is to be partners, not property, not possessions, not a prize. We're designed to be partners. They have a different perspective than us. So I just want to, and that's speaking from experience, as a young man, I had to be cleansed by God from the way I viewed women. Yeah. My high school and college years, I had a very distorted view of women myself. So when God cleansed me of that, I'm saying this with the guys. We need to stop it. We need to do better. So
our culture doesn't help. Truly, we get so many mixed messages because when you watch TV, when you go to a movie, when you binge on Netflix and stuff, what is out there gives such a mixed message, because the mixed message is really everything is all about sex all the time, and every conversation has some innuendo and some reference, and women are man, we know we have power. We know it. It's innate. We know it. And so sometimes that is used to gain ourselves power, to gain what we want. I think sometimes it becomes this whole big game where everybody's kind of playing a part and playing a role, but nobody's looking out for each other. Nobody's, I mean, we are sexual beings. That's one of the aspects of our humanity is we are sexual beings, but as you said, we're whole beings. We're body, mind, spirit, and soul. And the part of us that is our sexuality is good. But what happens is, particularly if we really aren't careful and look at each other through brother-sister eyes, then we start playing the same games that is out in the world where it really is all about sex. It's not about necessarily commitment. It's not about mutuality of honor and caring. And so the church does have to be different. We do have to look at it through a different lens. And that's our responsibility to do that. I don't know that I think we've gotten pretty lax and lazy about that and just kind of wholesale bought into looking at the same things, looking at things through the same lens as people who don't know Jesus Christ. It's sad. I would love to come back to talk about men if there's time to do that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, so for anybody who didn't see the message, the statistics are pretty clear that at 1 in 6, if it's 1 in 4 women have experienced sexual abuse, 1 in 6 men have experienced sexual abuse. And while some of the effects of the damage are very similar between, boys and girls, men and women, one of the things that does tend to happen more for boys and men than for women is questioning their sexuality. And that comes in the way that we look at men being strong. They're not supposed to be weak. They're not supposed to have any frailties. They're just supposed to always be able to tough it out. But if a little boy experiences sexual abuse, he's going to have for his whole life, and at least until he starts getting help and treatment and recovery for the abuse, he's likely to wonder about his own sexuality just because of the way that our physiology is. And so I know this is really an honest conversation and maybe more frank than you wanted, but I just think that effect on boys has a different kind of effect, and we don't talk about it enough. And sexual abuse doesn't make someone homosexual. It doesn't make someone bisexual. That's not an automatic. But I think that is one of the parts of us that can be damaged where we question and we don't know. And so that's something that men don't always want to talk about. It makes it harder for them to come forward and say they've been abused. So it's actually easier most of the time for women to talk about it than it is for men. So I actually have quite a burden for boys and who have experienced sexual abuse.
That's a really good point. Do you have time for one question?
Sure.
So Laura's asking this question: how can we help protect our kids when proper authorities aren't cooperating? What are the resources out there for our kids?
Yeah, there are. If you go to our website, saddleback.com, we've got you might want to give that link. I'm pretty sure saddleback.com / healing from abuse, right?
I think we made it short for you. It's just healing.
Okay, great. I like that even better. And there's a whole list of resources from counselors and therapists to those who work with children, to books, there's some PDFs. We tried to kind of stock it with all sorts of resources for folks. But, at the very end of the day, you don't give up just because one group of authorities don't believe you or don't accept it. If it's a school, take them out of that school. If it's a soccer team, take them off that team. I mean, don't be passive. Be very active in, if your children are experiencing abuse, take them out of that situation to the best of your ability. And don't give up pushing on the authorities to recognize it for what it was. Don't give up.
One of the many things I love about you, Kay, is that caring pastoral heart of yours. And I know personally you and your team spent hours bringing together and curating all these resources. So for those of you that are looking for resources, Kay's team actually spent hours just putting all these resources together from counseling and care groups, some of our Celebrate recovery groups, to community resources like hotlines and shelters and professionals. And you actually put some resources, some downloads and some books on there as well that's actually helped you. So thank you for doing all of that, and really take advantage of that opportunity. So you can go to saddleback.com/healing. So real quick, I want to wrap up, and I want to say this. If you live in the area of one of our 19 campuses at Saddleback Church, we would love for you to come to Saddleback. And if you need some help, or you need somebody to talk to, somebody just be there for you. We have pastors, staff, we have trained volunteers ready and willing to help. So please come to our campus, call us. You're not alone in this. We are a safe place for you. So please take advantage of that. If you don't live in the area, then I encourage you to find a local church. Find a church in your area that can be that safe place for you. And if you can't, we do have an online community for you as well. We have an online campus going on every hour on the hour that we have pastors and staff on there as well that's available to connect with you. You can go to saddleback.com/online for that as well. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it. I know you know somebody that needs to hear this conversation that might help them break free from this bondage. So share it. You can just share the link on your social network page, or just clicking that little button down below. But Kay, I just want to say thank you so much for today's conversation, for this weekend, but just who you are championing these really difficult and tough conversations. Truly, you are a blessing to so many people. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Anthony.
Yeah, God bless you. We love you, and God bless you. We'll see you next time. Bye.